Our Around the World segment, a Chinese coronavirus vaccine maker has gotten approval for the final stage of human trials of a vaccine. China National Biotech Group company will conduct its phase 3 trial in the United Arab Emirates. Now, if the vaccine proves successful, it would be a major breakthrough in putting an end to the spread of COVID-19. Well, thus far, countries have been limited to containment strategies as a vaccine or an effective therapeutic has yet to be discovered. But after their obstruction and perhaps outright lying about the spread and severity of this virus, can we trust China with a vaccine? Joining me now from Heritage for America, Noah Weinrich. And so, Noah, China's handling of the coronavirus pandemic certainly put our government at odds with Beijing. We've heard our own president and lawmakers on the Hill question China's integrity. I mean, they have a track record to prove that they're not great at telling the truth. So does the promise of a vaccine put our government in a tight spot with China in regards to whether or not they beat everyone else to the punch and they come up with a vaccine first?
Look, if there's one thing that the coronavirus has shown, it's that you really can't trust China. From day one, from January, they knew about this virus, but they covered it up and they let it out. The Chinese totalitarian communist government is directly responsible for unleashing the pandemic that has cost hundreds of thousands of people, possibly millions, their lives. So for us to start immediately trusting China because they say that they may have a vaccine, I think is far too early. I think the American people don't trust China, and I think that they're right. They've proven time and time again that they can't be relied upon.
Well, and how do you think the U.S. should proceed with its relationship with China, considering the Communist Party has even attempted to smear us? And if history is any indicator of the relationship that we've had with them, it's been pretty volatile. But at the same time, it's almost as if we're inseparable. How can we approach civility amid this pandemic to get us through all of this?
So Heritage Action is a grassroots organization, and I think we should take the lead from the grassroots. We've been conducting something called Project 2020, and we've been calling swing states for the last 3 months to talk to swing voters. We've overwhelmingly heard that they are ready to get tough with China. By a margin of 8-1, they want to bring manufacturing home and stop relying on China for essential goods. By a margin of 3-1, they want to get tough on China. Only 20% of swing voters said that they wanted to cooperate, even if it meant, paying a little less for goods. So what we should do is what we've been doing. Like President Trump has done, we need to keep slashing regulations. We need to make American companies more competitive. We need to strengthen trade. We need to make it easier to do business here so that we can keep beating China and so that we can end our reliance on essential goods from that country.
Well, what you just described also is essentially what the president's approach has been to China, and then it's sort of got a wrench thrown at the progress that we had been seeing or headed towards because of this pandemic. Do you think that President Trump is on the right track, or at least was on the right track, as far as negotiating a trade deal with China goes before all of this happened?
I think he was on the right track, and I think he is. Look, President Trump is a realist. He knows that we can't totally end our relationship with China. In some ways, it can be mutually beneficial, but he also knows that deep down, we can't just trust them. They're not a United Kingdom that we know they're on our side. But also, we can't totally end our reliance on them. It's just not practical. So I think he was right in looking for a trade deal, and I think he's right not to trust them now. And I think he's right to want to get tough on China. I think the American people are with him. I think that in his campaign, he's been correct to focus on China. That is the big geopolitical problem. I think some on the left want to say that it's not a problem. They want to say that there's nothing wrong with a communist state. They want to say that Trump is being xenophobic. And I think that 2020 has proven the exact opposite.
Well, and speaking of that, people on the left saying that, one of those people being Joe Biden, and I mean, he's essentially looks like he's on his way to becoming the Democratic presidential nominee. So what would a Joe Biden administration, if we're playing devil's advocate here, what would it look like? What would his approach be to China, considering the fact that he said that China is not as much of a threat as people make the country out to be, he says?
We've already seen his approach to China. He was vice president for 8 years. And in that time, we became closer than ever with China. More jobs went overseas to them. They grew stronger while we had a sluggish recovery. I think it would be more of the same. I think he would be soft on China. He's not a forceful guy. Whereas President Trump came in, he wanted to tackle China, and he has done so.
Well, and do you think what we're hearing from Joe Biden on the campaign trail sort of contradicts, like you mentioned, his record? He's painting himself as this progressive candidate who's a man of the people, and he cares about blue-collar workers. What do you think his record says in regards to that?
I think his record shows that that's incorrect. He's been a Washington insider for 40 years. He's come a long way from Scranton. I think his allegiances lie more with the swamp than with Pennsylvania. I think that he is perfectly content to keep shipping jobs to China, perfectly content to keep taking bad trade deals. And from what Heritage Action has heard from people around the country, in swing states and from our sentinels, our volunteers, it's that they don't trust the way things are. They don't trust the Washington way of dealing with China or not dealing with China. They want to tackle the problem, and they want to get tough, and they want someone in the White House who will get tough on China.
Well, and from the work that you've done, do you think that the president's message has been resonating with voters, and eventually that is going to help President Trump in his reelection bid in November, as opposed to what we heard from Joe Biden thus far?
I think so.
Why?
From our polling, like I said, people think that President Trump has done a good job on this pandemic. They know that he's aligning with them on China. They think he's doing a good job on the economy. It's too early to predict what's going to happen in November. Anything could happen. But from what we've been seeing so far and from what we've been hearing from people on the ground, they know that President Trump has been tough on China. The left thinks he's been too tough on China. But I don't think being tough on China is a real concern for people, real Americans on the ground.
Well, and how do you decipher that, though, as far as the way that real Americans on the ground look at this relationship, and how lawmakers, do you think there's a disparity that needs to be gapped there?
I think so, absolutely. I think some lawmakers have been in Washington for too long. I think some of them have only been talking to their staff in D.C., maybe their donors. They haven't been spending time with real people around the country. Liberals, moderates, conservatives, everyone agrees. Most of America agrees that China is a real problem. But when you get away from the people who are seeing their manufacturing jobs leave, who are being crippled by insane regulations from DC, then you begin to lose sight of that, and you start to cozy up to China, and you think that China and Huawei and dominant Chinese companies are not a threat to the U.S.
Well, and I think this tough approach, like you've been talking about, and these attempts to rein in China, it's something that we're not going to necessarily see the Trump administration stop anytime soon, especially considering that we're just a few months away from November.